Today's episode 8. We're going to be talking about pruning and deadheading. These are techniques that are going to help your garden to look its best. Also, it's going to help your plant to stay healthy and produce. Okay guys, so I had to change the locations real quick because it's raining off and on and mosquitoes are coming back with a vengeance. Also, I want to show you guys this plant. Can you guess what that is? That's a sucker that I took from a tomato plant, and that's a part of the pruning process, So this sucker, I brought it inside. It's got some indoor soil that I brought from a big box store, and of course I feed it on a regular basis, but that's a sucker from a mature plant. And as you can see, it's doing its thing over here in this corner. It's got plenty of sunlight from both directions. It's got a stake to help support it. I haven't really took that much time with it. As you can see, it's leaning a little bit. It needs to be connected to the supports, and yeah, that'll be thriving in no time. But I wanted to show you that that's a part of the pruning process, removing the suckers from your mature plants or plants that are growing. If you use the pruning and your deadheading techniques, this can also not only improve the appearance of your plants, but it also encourages healthy growth, and it can also encourage the plant to produce more blooms or fruits. So whether you're growing flowers, you're growing herbs, you're growing vegetables, it really can make a difference in the health of your plant. Let's start by talking about what these techniques are and how do we actually accomplish this. So pruning involves cutting back unwanted or overgrown parts of your plant. This can be removing dead or diseased parts. It can also include the shaping of your plant. So how do you prune? Okay, first let's start with this. The right tools. Now, experts will tell you you need to use pruners. Okay, if you're a beginner gardener, you may not, for whatever reason, have pruners or have access to pruners. Any sharp object that you can use to cut at a 45-degree angle can be used if it's clean and sharp. That could be scissors, that could be a knife, it could be pruners or something similar. Just let it be sharp, and please let it be clean, because the last thing we want to do is transfer disease from one plant to another. If your purpose that day of pruning is to remove dead leaves or branches, or diseased on its way out to be dead leaves or branches, you don't want to transfer whatever is causing that situation to another plant. So always, before and after, clean your tools. The second thing is you want to identify what needs to be pruned. So if you're doing your regular checks, you're doing your regular watering, you will notice in that process what needs to be taken care of. This is, they say, when they say tend to your garden, right? You're paying attention, you're nurturing your garden, you're feeding your garden, you're watering your garden, but you're also pruning on a regular basis. So identify what needs to be removed, whether that's dead leaves or branches, diseased leaves or branches, or maybe it's unwanted leaves or branches such as suckers, or maybe it's a branch that's growing in a totally wrong direction than you want your plant to grow. When you're cutting at a 45-degree angle, you want to cut right above a leaf node or a bud node. I mentioned earlier that you want to cut at a 45-degree angle, and that's recommended because, when it rains, you want that water to be able to flow away, and you don't want it to be able to sit. So if you make a straight cut, that leaves opportunity for water to just sit on your plant. And remember, we want to make sure that we're pruning on a regular basis because we don't want overgrown plants, especially if you're growing vegetables like tomatoes. It's nice to have a nice bushy plant, but you really want that plant to be more productive in bearing the fruit that you want from that plant. So we're growing tomatoes. We're not growing leaves and branches that are not beneficial to producing fruit. So you remove those parts of the plant that take away the energy that can be used by the plant to produce the fruit that you're really growing your plant to do. In previous episodes, we talked about the purpose of having flowers in our garden and how it's beneficial for bringing pollinators to the garden, also beneficial for deterring pests that like to attack our plants. An example of that will be the marigolds. So as beautiful as it is, you know, that goes through a life cycle also. So oftentimes you will find that some of the blooms of the marigold flower or whatever flower you're using has been spent. Okay, so you have some blooms that are thriving, you have other blooms that are on their way out the door. You want to remove those because that encourages more blooms to form. So that's what we refer to as deadheading. So not only does it make the flower or encourages the flower to produce more blooms, it just really does make your garden look tidier. And dead flowers, dead plants, dead leaves, dead stems, dead branches, those things do attract certain pests to your garden. So you want to remove those as soon as you notice them. So what does it mean when I say it produces the flower to produce more blooms when you're deadheading? I mean that energy, as I said, just with your vegetable plants or your trees, whatever you're growing, it redirects that energy back into the main stem of the plant, back into the roots, where it can redirect that energy elsewhere to produce more blooms, to produce more fruit, to produce more healthier stems, more healthier branches. It also signals the plant to stop producing seed, because if your plant thinks that it's on its way out, it has a natural instinct to try to produce its offspring, which is not the fruits or the blooms. That's a byproduct of the plant itself. But it wants to go to seed so it can survive the following season. Not necessarily the following growing season, but the season for that plant in which it produces. Once you've identified the plants that are already spent or the plants that are on their way out to be spent, they're done, they're kaput, then remove them. How do you remove them? You can use scissors, you can use pruners, you can use a knife, whatever you have that's sharp and clean. With flower blooms, people often use their fingertips. Make sure your hands are clean or you have on gloves. Now, transferring disease from one plant to another, you can simply pinch the flower and remove it or use a tool. You want to follow that bloom that you're removing all the way down to the first set of healthy leaves, and that is where you pinch or you use a tool to remove it. I see a lot of people just grabbing the head of the bloom and just pulling it off. Well, follow that bloom stem down to that first set of healthy leaves, and that is where you should snip or pinch or use a tool to remove it. And as I said earlier, you don't have to have pruning on a regular schedule. Do it when you notice that there's an issue. This is more of a preventive method for keeping your plants healthy and thriving and growing in the direction in which you want them to grow. So different plants do have different needs in terms of pruning and deadheading. For example, we often say for things like herbs, we say we are harvesting our herbs. We're basically, when you're harvesting your herbs, that's a form of pruning also, right? Of course, you're removing or you're deadheading any part of the plant that doesn't look well, but when you're harvesting, you're also pruning because you're going to do it in a certain way that encourages that plant to become more bushier, which means you're shaping it, right? And also with herbs, you want to make sure that if you do see it starting to bloom or flower, you want to remove that immediately, because remember, those things are signaling the plant to basically be on its way out by producing its seeds for the next growing season for that plant. You want to prolong that, okay? If you want to continue to grow those herbs, go ahead and prune them or harvest them so that they can continue to grow, the leafy part of what you want to harvest. For the marigolds, yes, please do remove those spent blooms, because you want that plant, that flower, to continue to grow throughout the season so it continues to deter pests for you. The more you deadhead, the more blooms will follow. For vegetables like tomatoes, we talked about that earlier. Remember, we mentioned the sucker that I have over here as a house plant. You want to remove those suckers. That's those branches that grow in between the main stem and the off branch. You will often have another stem that will shoot up in between the main stem and the off branch. That's what we refer to as a sucker. Remove those and start that as another plant or discard it. Okay guys, that's it for today. Not much to it, but very essential. If you want a healthy, thriving garden, you want to make sure that you're tidying it up with pruning and pruning your plants, and also deadheading your flowers. With these simple techniques, your garden will look better and it will continue to be more productive for you with the flower blooms and the fruit and vegetable production. In our next episode, we will talk a little bit how to harvest your homegrown produce and how to store it and how to enjoy it at its peak. So make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on the next episode. If you found this information helpful or as a refresher or a reminder, please give me a thumbs up. Let us know in the comment section if you do the pruning and the deadheading on a regular basis. Thanks for watching and happy gardening. I'm going to see you guys in the next episode.